You're listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. At the SMP, we embrace the Stoic principle of the obstacle is the way, whether we can take the hardest things in our lives and use them as a way to learn and grow into the best versions of ourselves. If you're here, you're likely a growth-oriented parent of a young person who's adopted a trans identity. I'm Stoic Mom, a life coach and educator who is also a growth-oriented parent of an adult trans-identified daughter. The conversation you're about to listen to is part of a special series in which I talk with other moms determined to find healthy ways of navigating gender ideology in their homes. Moms whose stories and strategies may inspire you. I hope you find value and wisdom from my conversation with this Stoic Mama. Okay. Well, I'm very excited to have you back on, Regina.
I'm excited to be here.
Um, So interestingly enough, I'd made a list of an episode list, right, for these conversations with Stoic mamas along the way, which is a special series of conversations. It is sponsored by Dream School. And I was realizing, I think I'd forgotten that our first conversation for the podcast was also the first conversation in this series. So you were you were the
Sweet.
first conversation. I know.
Fun.
Yay.
That's awesome.
And it's always fun to have a conversation with you. So I'm so excited you agreed to come back on and visit with me again.
Delighted to do it.
Um, so this series of conversations is meant to be with moms who are, in one form or another, currently still entrenched, right? Like this is part of your life, and you're having to navigate um, gender ideology, in the home, in the home. So, would you mind giving us a quick update, but also remind us how this shows up in your home, what it is that you're dealing with in your household?
Yeah. I think my situation is a little different than a lot of the moms you work with in
Mhm.
that I don't have a quote unquote trans identified child. I have a child who's non binary, which, can certainly lead to trans, but I don't have anybody going through that process at this time. What I do have is I'm married to another woman, and she is very much on board and supportive of all things gender.
Mhm.
And I used to be there in that place. And over the last few years of learning more about any variety of topics, I started to see a very different perspective to the gender ideology. And when I would express concerns or difference of opinions, it was not met with welcome opening arms, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I understand this. Nobody likes to have their beliefs challenged.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
that's not true. I enjoy having my beliefs challenged. I think you do. I think there's people who do enjoy that because of any number of reasons. I like knowing that I'm thinking correctly about the world.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a time when that was not the case, right? So it's all a process. So essentially living in a household with three people who are very much, they all have their pride flags everywhere, and rainbow flags, and they're going to Seattle Pride this weekend, and they're all in it.
Mhm.
um, and I am a uh, believer in there's two sexes, and
Mhm.
how either sex can express itself is beautiful and wonderful and open to interpretation and part of what makes us all unique.
Mhm. Right. And so in that sense, you've got the conflict right there in your home to some
Mhm,
degree, right? You've got
mhm,
this worldview in your face,
mhm.
every day.
All day, every day. Yep,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
everywhere. It's and more. It's growing as my children grow, and
Mm-hmm.
they jump more on board with it.
Mm,
It's definitely becoming more prevalent, um, and they're very clear on where I stand, and so it's not something that comes up. They're respectful of not putting it in my face in the sense of you have to listen to this, but
okay.
it's there in the sense of, like I say, everywhere I look, trans pride flags and books and leaflets and pamphlets, and They're swimming in the water.
They are swimming in the water. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And you and I haven't had a one-on-one conversation since that podcast interview, which I do recommend listeners go back and listen to. Even if you've listened to it before, I listened to it again yesterday just to review that conversation for today. And you have an incredible amount of wisdom to share, what you've got to navigate and the way and the grace with which you navigate it, I just think is really impressive. And you bring a lot of, I don't know, just it's beyond wisdom, the way that you combine your knowledge and your wisdom to just continue to grow and get bigger than the problem,
Mhm.
which I think is the challenge, the task that that the moms in the community, the moms that find their way here, that's kind of what they're after, right? I think we're all just trying to get bigger than the problem, knowing it's not going away anytime soon, keeping our families together and using that stoic orientation of the obstacle is the way, right? This is the context. This water that they're swimming in, we kind of have to swim in it too because it's our family. And so how do we do that in a way that grows us, that we can get bigger than I just think the world needs some stable, wise elders, women who are grounded and open-hearted at the same time, which I think can be the result of doing the work that I see you doing. You are ex-woke mom, is I know your Substack handle,
Mhm.
and that's what inspired me to want to have you back on, is you've put some comments on the Substack lately and in the community. You're a member of our online community too, and I just wanted to dig into some of those with you and the work that I can see that you're doing. Just before hitting record, you and I were talking about shadow work and how that can feel a little inaccessible to people sometimes. And you said you've had a little bit of a shift in how you perceive that, and that has been helpful for you. Do you mind,
Yeah,
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 sharing
sure.
sharing that again?
I think so. Shadow work to me seems very like kind of amorphous and this like big topic. Like, what does that even mean? What is my shadow? And when I reframed it to inner child work, which I've also heard and learned a lot about, it became much more accessible. Like, I can see where I show up as not an adult.
Mm,
Like, that's very clear in my life, right? And so that's an inner child who's coming forward to protect me, right?
okay.
And to protect my heart. And
Hmm.
so there's the way that I can look at it and say, and who is showing up in a moment? Um, it's not my proudest moment to say that my 15-year-old ran the show a lot of the time. Still does.
Mm,
I mean, I can't say that that's done. Um, but when I would stonewall, right? My wife tells me that I'm like an expert stonewaller, which has like may have its place in certain moments if somebody's like not close to you and being a jerk, whatever, the ability to just tune them out, it has its place. When that's happening in my family relationships, that's not helping anyone. But that's a teenager way of showing up in the world, right?
mm-hmm.
Whereas we all know the temper tantrums are like the 2 and 3-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to easily access like, oh, here's where my inner child is showing up because me as a mature adult would not do this behavior.
Mm,
So it
mm-hmm.
was it was easy to see in my day-to-day um, interactions with people who was showing up at different times. I was like, okay, I can see you now. And to me, that was an easier access, like I say, than shadow work. It's like, well, what's the shadow? Is it the stonewalling? But the stonewalling is coming from emotions,
Mm-hmm.
that so there's this behavior. So yeah, so that became a much easier access point for me. And one of the other things in this process that I learned is The teenagers, usually 15-year old me was the one most in charge. Okay.
Okay.
Is always, and I don't use that term lightly, but I think here it applies, always is protecting a younger inner child.
Mm,
You
mm-hmm,
know? And so as I
mm-hmm,
started diving in, I saw, the younger and younger versions of myself that got stuck.
mm.
And when one has inner children and you're triggered, the inner child will always take over.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. And so kind of in Jungian terms, our ego comes online as soon as we have self-awareness.
Mhm.
And its job is to scan the environment, scan for danger, scan for danger. And anything that it perceives as dangerous, it's going to break off and put it in the shadow, right? And so that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is those times that you got stuck, that was a point in childhood where probably some of that happened, right? Something got broke off and put in the shadow, right? And so those triggers, those emotional triggers are going to call those parts of us online, and that is a lot of really great information if we are attuned to it and we know how to work with it. It's great information to help us integrate really and feel more stable. But we have to be able to look at it, right? Yes. And that takes, what would you say that takes to be able to look at it?
Courage.
Yeah,
It's painful.
it's painful.
It's really painful because one of the other things we were talking about is, before we started, is responsibility.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
responsibility is our ability to respond. And so that's back to my interactions. If I'm responding by stonewalling, then my ability to respond in that moment is not mature. It's not
Mm,
integrated, it's not whole, it's not loving, it's not all of those things. And why? Because again, I'm protecting a wounded
yes.
child
Yes.
who feels hurt, who feels scared, and that takes a lot of courage to look at. And it's, a lot of people, when I would describe this, they would say, "Wow, that sounds so hard." And it's like, when I think of something as being hard, it makes me want to make it easy, which could be numbing
Hmm.
or, ignoring it. And like that's very much societally what we do. When I switched it to, it's not hard, it's painful. And I
Yes.
look at like a young child who's in pain, I'm going to comfort them. I'm not going to try
Hmm.
and numb them. I'm not going to try and, you know, ignore their pain. I want to comfort them and um, not coddle, that's not the right word, but to show them that I'm there for them. I would do that with either of my children or any
Yeah.
child on this, if a child loses their parent and they're scared, you're going to go to that child and get down on their level and maybe hold them or comfort them. And when it comes to our own pain or our own fear, we just want to stuff it, ignore it,
Hmm.
don't look at it.
Hmm.
And so that was another mindset shift that
Hmm.
was really helpful, that like this is painful.
Hmm.
There's pain in
Hmm.
there that I need to look at and love that inner child, validate that inner child, and then help that child grow out of the stuck place. That
Yeah.
was the instrumental piece that had been missing for me for a long time, was that helping the inner child to grow and mature out of that.
Okay. Yes. Helping the inner child to grow and mature out of that. I want to come back to that. I want to, though, acknowledge what you said about reframing it from hard to painful. And I find myself doing this a lot, encouraging moms to think about the language that they're using, because I think often too we judge that pain as bad, um, or negative, right? If something is painful, it's negative. And I think when we use those words, we're sending ourselves a message we shouldn't be feeling it. Like
Mhm.
pain, we shouldn't be feeling pain. And so that's why we have that tendency, right, to stuff it or distract ourselves or and we do it with our kids. It's I love hearing that you say, this is how you would work with a child who is in pain. But I think a lot of the moms in my generation, with these older kids, we struggled with seeing our kids in pain. And that is the way we responded to them too, was by distracting them or, telling them it's going to be okay, or you know what I mean? Like not really holding that pain with them, but by sharing our strategies for stuffing it or distracting, and so rather than holding that space to do what you were saying, helping that child grow up. So I'm curious, like, what does that look like when you're working with your own inner child? How do you do that?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, just to be clear, I mean, I have certainly had plenty of times when, with my own children, I've helped them stuff or ignore or distract. Like this is all a process. I don't want to say like I have
Yeah,
anything all the way figured out, and I've been learning and definitely doing things differently through my own process, which then spills over into the people I
yeah,
love.
yeah.
And so, what is that process? With an inner child, what I was taught previously was validate their whatever their feelings are. Okay,
Mm-hmm,
validate and sit with them and just soothe them, and that's a good starting point because a lot of
mm-hmm.
times we get stuck because we weren't validated. We would
Right.
have some emotion as a young child, and it would be met with anger or dismissal or whatever the case may be. There's so many scenarios. And so that's what create the stuck point. Like, hey, I'm feeling really scared right now and you're ignoring me. So that means I have to ignore myself, right? We learn
Mm-hmm.
that. So validating and really being gentle with the inner child is very important. And I found some parts of myself that were really mad, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
so getting through the anger, letting them be angry. And so it's a visualization process, an imagination,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it points out the power of our imagination,
Yes.
is that we can use that to sit with this child, validate her fear, validate her pain, and give her space. Like me as an adult me now, sitting with her, saying, "It's okay. Go ahead, scream, yell, get it out, do all of
Mm-hmm.
that. Say what you want to say. What do you want to say right now? Go ahead. I can take it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
here for you."
Mm-hmm.
And then, and so once that happens, if there's not this next step of teaching that inner child how to process the emotions, then it stays stuck, right? So learning how to process emotions, I had to learn that for myself to then teach it to my inner children, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that means sitting with painful emotions,
Mm-hmm.
anger, fear, frustration, feeling disrespected, whatever it is. And rather than saying that person shouldn't have done that to make me feel this way,
Right. Mm-hmm.
saying, oh, I feel this way and it's okay. It's
Mm.
okay. Not pushing it away in myself,
Mm-hmm.
not stuffing it, sitting with it and feeling the feelings. It's our body's way of processing
Yes.
emotions.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
just setting time aside in the moment if possible, and if not, sometimes you're at work and somebody says something or your child says something and I'd have to set it aside so that I could just be with my child. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that meant like, hey, that was actually a really hurtful thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
but learning how to process emotions. And the interesting thing is, I noticed as I did that, I wasn't, and still have room to grow into, handling good emotions, quote unquote good emotions.
Uh-huh.
Like something that was really joyful or
Uh-huh.
exciting
Uh-huh.
or some momentous occasion in my life. And I just kind of brush it aside, because when we shrink our capacity to feel the quote unquote so-called negative emotions,
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
shrink our capacity to feel everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was fascinating to watch this. Wow, this is so beautiful. Like what a beautiful moment right now. And my mind is going, okay, what's next? Rather than just being present and in it and savoring the moment.
Yeah, I think sometimes too that yeah, what's next? We fear allowing things that feel that good, because we we don't want it yanked out from under us, because the
We
next
don't feel
moment
like we
might not feel,
deserve it.
don't feel like we deserve it. Uh-huh. And that it's the impermanence of it almost seems threatening or scary, or, that if it goes away, there's something wrong with me. And so I just don't allow it at all. Or, yeah, there's so many reasons that we don't allow the joy, Yes, yes. I think I said that very thing, that our capacity for pain matches our capacity for joy, And so if we are trying to constantly numb our pain and not feel it, we're not going to be able to feel the joyful moments as well.
And it can feel a little out of control sometimes
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
feel either. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we're very, we're so not present that to feel, what I noticed was when I started feeling one little emotion, there was something underneath that was like, oh, wait, she's paying attention. Come on, let's go.
Mm.
You know? And so there's this bubbling up
Yeah.
of a lot of things that are stuck in our bodies. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and that's another thing, is to realize that the inner child is our body.
Mm.
And that may sound a little weird, but when I talk to people, they're like, I don't remember specific things from my childhood. And I'm like, do you ever get feelings or like, I think we think of memories as a film that we can replay in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Mm-hmm.
feelings when you smell those fresh baked cookies that your mom made,
Mm-hmm.
or when you hear a certain song that was maybe your dad's favorite that reminds you of him, but he was abusive. And it's all these things that are mixed up in our bodies, and that feeling is the memory,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in our
Mm-hmm.
bodies. And so this yeah, the physical sensation sometimes got pretty intense. And that's another thing where I'd be like, I'd want to run away from that, sometimes literally. Like, I'm very active, so I'd be like, oh god, I'm feeling a lot, I'm going to go for a walk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was another way to avoid. So
Mm-hmm.
there's all these tricky little things, like, oh, going for a walk is so healthy. It is, except when it's avoidance,
Mm-hmm.
and so to just set aside 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to just be with yourself and feel and allow is transformative and probably the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's that sort of turning toward it,
Mhm.
right? And having a relationship even with the feeling or with that part of yourself, that inner child part that needs your attention, needs your tending. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so few of us have had any exposure to anything like this or yeah, any grasp of how to do this type of thing. And it can be challenging
Yeah.
to do it on your own, I think.
I don't recommend anybody starting off trying to do this on their own,
Yeah, I
because
don't either.
if you don't have the support and a dam breaks,
Yeah.
it could be ugly. It really could. And I don't say that to scare anyone. It's just, I think it's important to acknowledge we live in a society that is very much geared towards keeping our emotions in a very narrow range
Hmm.
of feeling not deserving, not good enough, and in need of external validation, right? So that we buy things.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
mean, really, that's to me, in my opinion, that's pretty much what it comes down to. And
Yes.
so this is free. I mean, getting somebody to work with you, you want to pay for somebody who's well trained in this. Like, in
Mm-hmm.
that respect, it's not free. But when you learn the work,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's something you do on the go. And
Mm-hmm.
it is not only the hardest thing I've ever done, it's also the single most rewarding work I've ever done.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. A few things in there I wanted to kind of reinforce how difficult it is to do on your own. And part of that is your ego,
Hmm.
who which is just working really hard to protect you. That's its job. Keep you safe, and this feels unsafe, right? The ego does not want you to do this work. Yeah. And so hence that sort of, things can explode and what happens, that ego is going to want you to put all this stuff back in the shadow, back in the box and not look at it.
Or the ego itself will freak out,
Uh-huh.
which is, yeah. And then it can get ugly
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. So having somebody who can hold that space for you, yes, and be there with you. You also talk about it being the single most rewarding work. And something else that you and I, just hit on briefly before recording is agency, consciousness, you know. And I guess I should ask you first, like when you say that rewarding, what would you say is the most rewarding part of it? Why is it so rewarding?
Um, I think in going through this process, when I feel like I still have a long ways to go,
Hmm.
but just starting it, I realized that I have the last few years how hard they've been. It's easy to get used to where you're at. It was easy for me to get used to where I was at, and things were just this way, and they weren't very good, but I was just kind
Mm,
of used to it, and I cried a lot, a
mm,
lot. There
hmm.
was a lot of frustration, and I just didn't know what to do. And I had help, and I had coping strategies, and that, like, I went to work, I provided for my family, I did all the things, but inside I was struggling.
Mm,
And
hmm.
in going through various phases of it, certainly starting with the Stoic approach, to be able to say, like, okay, this is not going away.
Hmm.
This situation is not going to change for me. Like, I have to change for it.
Hmm.
And so starting that process was things started to get better, and my relationship with everyone in my family started getting better. And then I started doing this deeper inner child work, and I found
Hmm.
that, oh, I woke up lighter.
Hmm.
I didn't wake up with a sense of dread every day.
Hmm.
I didn't I
Hmm.
didn't cry most mornings. Like, that's gone, and I'm genuinely feeling um, much happier, much more connected to myself. My relationship with everyone in my family is 1,000 times better than it was even the last time we talked, and it was
Mm,
good then.
hmm.
But it's like the when I come home from work, my son will like run up to me and throw his arms around me and be like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're home. I missed you." And that wasn't happening before,
Mm,
you know?
hmm.
And my daughter
Hmm.
and I, we will like, she loves to wrestle. So we'll wrestle sometimes to the point of she's like, "I have to stop. It hurts," like from laughing so much. And I'm like, what can be better than this? And that would not
Mm,
have happened before because there was so much energetic shielding against each other.
mm, hmm.
And
Hmm.
now that I've opened up and been like, I can now accept myself. That's where it started. I couldn't accept them because I wasn't accepting myself. I wasn't accepting
Mm,
that I had parts of myself that were still in so much pain and were crying out for my attention. How can I give my attention to my own children if I have parts of me that are still suffocating?
I'm excited to share that this episode of Conversations Along the Way is sponsored by Dream School, which is brought to you by the same three psychoanalysts who bring you the podcast This Jungian Life. For those who may not know, Lisa Marciano, author of the book Motherhood and one of the founders of Therapy First, is one of the co-hosts of This Jungian Life. The This Jungian Life podcast inspired me to start paying attention to the symbolism and meaning in my dreams. As a result, around my daughter's 18th birthday, I had a series of dreams that brought me much comfort and peace around trusting both her journey and the foundation we have provided her. I continued to spend time pondering my dreams and researching the symbols that appeared, and basically just hoped that I was, air quotes, doing it right. I finally gave myself the gift of dream school and can confidently say it's inspired huge transformation in my life. It quickly deepened my appreciation for the wisdom my dreams offer me and increased my drive to learn more about Jungian philosophy and how I can use it to strengthen my coaching skill set. So not only do you learn how to, as they say, decode the language of metaphor and symbol, you'll learn quite a bit about Jung's ideas around human development over the lifespan, including his concept of individuation, a process that we're all invited to do in midlife that, well, adds more life to the rest of our lives. I could go on and on about the value of consciously engaging in our own midlife individuation process, but I'll save that for my posts on the Stoic Mom Project and my work in helping clients navigate their own unique individuation journeys. If you're interested in Dream School and what it might inspire in you, you can use the code STOICMOM15 at checkout for 15% off of Dream School tuition. That's Stoic Mom in all caps, followed by the digits 15. And now back to the conversation.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think one thing that I would say is talking about the obstacle is the way. I think to bring it back to the deepest level of responsibility, I was the obstacle.
Ah,
And
okay.
that is like that again, to take it takes so much courage to look at that and go, nope,
Yes.
it's all me. It's all me.
Yes.
They're not doing this to me.
Yes.
They're not doing this to make me uncomfortable or sad or angry or mad. They're doing this because they truly believe that it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And me being angry about it, me like holding back, me, being sad and frustrated isn't changing their minds. It's just making us a lot more miserable.
Mm-hmm. 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 Um, yes. And it's avoidance too, right? Like that's avoidance. Like being angry and giving your power away like that is a way to avoid recognizing yourself as the obstacle to your own well-being
100%.
and that you're the only one who can do that work. Yeah. Yeah. And even if they change, even if this particular circumstance went away, something else would show up in your life that would make you feel the same way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That exactly, exactly. Because the spillover in doing this is to like every area of my life,
Hmm.
right? Because I'm different.
Hmm.
So the world responds differently to me.
Exactly. It responds differently to you. Yeah, it's interesting that I, I've thought often about living in a hostile world. I think so many people are experiencing living in a hostile world, but that hostility is in ourselves. And once we find peace in ourselves, we no longer live in a hostile world. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Even
And
if
it
we
also,
disagree
even
with
if we
somebody.
disagree, but
Hmm.
that also, when I'm peaceful and accepting of myself and therefore can be accepting of someone else, we have much more interesting and meaningful conversations, no
Hmm.
matter what. That's the other thing is people that my children were hanging out with that I didn't know because I was secretly and maybe not so secretly judging them for
Hmm.
being this way.
Hmm.
I wasn't getting to know them, and when I did, I was like, oh, these are actually really cool people, and we
Yeah.
disagree on this part. That's okay. And so I was able to then talk to my children about their friends in a different way, and it really changes everything. And I also want to say, like, I'm not trying to dismiss the very real concerns that
Hmm.
parents have.
Hmm. Hmm.
you know it's I can't say if one of my children came home and was like, oh, I want to go on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones or whatever, that it would just be all um, unicorns and rainbows, so to speak. For me, from my perspective, it
Hmm.
would be a struggle. Like that would be really, really hard
Hmm.
for me. So it's it's where I'm at now. Things are really good, and like you say, things change. So
Hmm.
that will be just a bigger test of my abilities to stay
Yes.
grounded, to stay centered, to stay connected with
To stay
myself and
present
stay
too.
present.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Um, and I think between now and then, how much do you, how much worry, how much of your life do you give that fear of that future to, which I think happens often. So much of our energy goes to preventing that future that it makes it hard to be present and choose who we want to be in this very moment. Yeah. Which brings us kind of back to that consciousness and agency. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well. Like how does this work relate to free will and agency?
I think, yeah, so that's a really big question.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it's important first to acknowledge that a lot of worry and anxiety, especially in this community of parents with trans-identified children, is rooted in reality.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
that's a really important point, is that if one's child does decide to go down a medicalizing route, right, the chances of complications and harm are high.
Hmm.
You know, so
Hmm.
that's real.
Hmm.
And like I say, my children are not at that point. Hopefully, they'll never be at that point. I can't see the future, so I don't know. But um, I can sit here and worry about a possible future. And like you say, that takes me out of the present with them.
Hmm.
And that's not what I quote unquote want to be doing. Right. So I don't have free will if yet my mind is still going down these paths,
Hmm.
right? That I don't want it to. Like that's not my free will.
Hmm.
You see? So when I can, and a lot of that again comes from these inner children who have
Yes.
seen what happens when they can't control a situation. I'm scared and I can't control mom's response to me,
Hmm.
so I have to hide, right? And that comes out in these different ways. I have to hide my feelings, that is,
Hmm.
and be somebody different to get her approval. Because without mom's or dad's approval, or a caretaker, grandparent, whoever it is, without their approval, I'm not safe.
Right.
So there's that, it's a safety issue. And just like I can use my imagination to help to soothe my inner child and teach her how to process her emotions and grow out of these stuck places, I can also use my imagination to come up with some really bad scenarios.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's not useful to anyone. You know, I can acknowledge that, yeah, there's some potential harm that could happen. There's potential harm in getting in my car and driving to the store. You
Yes.
know, how
Yes.
far am I going to take that? In this moment, we're all safe. We're all here and happy and healthy. Let me be present, like you say, and focus on that.
Yes. Yes.
And that to me is agency and being able to choose. You know, you said something about ego and ego protecting us, and that reminded me that,
Hmm.
yeah, that is ego's job. And the way ego does that is through mental programs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think for me, when I look at what my ego is doing as mental programs, it makes sense because we're very much programmed.
Yes.
You know, people don't like the word brainwashing, and I get that, but we are programmed. Like that's
Yes.
kind of human nature.
Yep.
And it
I
makes
agree.
sense for us to be programmed
Hmm.
because habits can serve us.
Hmm. Hmm.
But when our habitual thinking patterns are not serving us, it's time to rewrite the program.
Right.
And I think that's a way, again, for me to reframe it in a way that was neutral. Oh, it's a program. Well, I understand programs, right? We all have programs on
Mm.
our computers. I have programs on my phone.
Hmm.
Okay, and I just have to go in and rewrite them. Now, it's not that simple. It's just like a few lines of code. But that idea is one that really helped me gain that agency back, or be in the process of gaining greater agency. I think is a better way to say it, because I can't say I have 100% agency because the programs are deep. They're
The
deep,
programs are deep. Yes.
so
Yes.
deep, and they're tricky. They're subtle. The more you look at them, the
Yes.
more that they'll hide. and then shift
Uh-huh.
just a little bit. So you're like, oh gosh, that program's all done. Oh, it changed colors a little bit, you know?
Yes. Yes, and I think the more you practice this, the more you catch yourself going, asking that question, right? Like, what program is running right now? And if you can do that, if you can build that skill, I think there's a lot of agency in that too. What program do I want to be running right now? If we, that's what gives us some choice in the moment, rather than that 15-year-old part of yourself taking the wheel and driving your action. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And a way that I got to mental programs was kind of reverse engineering in a way, because I looked at the behavior, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
behavior is
Mm-hmm.
the end result.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was driving the behavior?
Yes.
Okay, well, in the case of stonewalling, is the example I've used, um, there were certain emotions that led to the behavior, and there were certain mental programs that led to the emotions. So it was sitting and saying, okay, I'm stonewalling. Why am I stonewalling? What emotions are present that's leading to this behavior? And then what thoughts cause the emotions?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
see, so then because at first it was like mental programs. So I don't know what programs are running. I don't what do you mean? I don't know. When I went back and looked at it backwards, it was like, oh, there it is. And then when you do that a few times, it becomes much easier, like you say, to catch it. And then you catch it sooner and sooner and earlier, and and it gets easier every time.
Yes. Yes, because you're creating the program to help you do that very thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
a helpful program.
A helpful program. That's right. Yes. And what you're describing too, though, is a very different orientation to the behavior than most of us are used to. We're we're we're, we're typically assessing behaviors all the time, judging them as, good, bad, right, or wrong, and addressing the behavior instead of doing that work that you did to find what was underlying the behavior, that there is always something underlying the behavior. And that's what we're really
Yeah,
dealing with, and if we want to see true change, we've got to get there. We've got to get, yeah, we've got to solve that mystery. What is driving the behavior? And that is all that stuff, right? That got split off and or stuck. And yes, that the ego has disallowed.
yeah,
Mm,
yes,
hmm
exactly.
hmm And
Yeah,
we're full of it, right? Like and when our children act out, it can really trigger this stuff for us, the stuff that we have split off. And that I think is another real benefit of doing this work is then our children might have a fewer of those programs, hopefully, right? Ideally, that's what we're doing is kind of cleaning up some of the programs for future generations,
hopefully. I'm
hopefully.
trying. Well, and I think it helps me also when I can look at my behaviors that way. Uh, you know, there's a lot of coping mechanisms out there for behaviors.
Yes.
And it's
Hmm.
kind of like, do I just want to cope with bad behavior?
Right.
And there's also a lot of that in the parenting world of how to cope with bad behavior in
Hmm.
the gentle parenting way or, you
Or
know,
extinguish bad behavior.
or extinguish bad behavior. But if I look at it as like, wait, I'm acting this way because of this emotion which came from this
Hmm.
thought, I
Hmm.
can do that with my children. Oh, here's this behavior. What are you feeling right now that's causing this behavior and what thought led to that emotion? Because I've looked deeply into myself in this, and I can say that string of events, thought, emotion, behavior,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
true all the time. I mean, unless it's like a reaction, like you touch a hot stove and you're, like I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, behaviors in our day-to-day lives of interacting with others or with myself, which is another piece of having to create. My inner children were not willing when I was like, hey, I'm here for you now. They're not like, great, let's do this. It took time for me to earn their trust.
Yes. 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 And we've got it's important, I think, to bring this to our relationships with our children as well. It's interesting that what I'm thinking about is recent conversations with Rose in the Attachment Matters series, and the role of frustration and how that's a primal emotion underlying so many of our other emotions, but that behaviors that we tend to, not appreciate in our children, it's them communicating to us their frustration. Something is not working for me. Something in my life is not working for me. Our job as the caregiver is to guide them through that process of identifying and articulating what's not working for them, so that we can respond to it in a healthy way rather than just trying to shut down the behavior, which does not, then they're not learning how to process those emotions and how to deal with life's disappointments, which there will be plenty of, and that is a capacity that we have to develop, is the ability to be with the discomfort of frustration and disappointment and these things that don't feel so good. They're not fun feelings, but they are human feelings and they're important and they're not going away. They'll just find tricky ways to run our lives if we don't process them in a healthy way. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, when we learn how to process them in a healthy way, they go away so much faster.
Yes.
Resistance keeps them there.
Yes.
What we resist persists.
That's
Like, there's
right.
your cliche for the day, but it's so true.
It is
Like,
so
it's
true.
just, there's a reason that it's a cliche.
And I think Carl Jung said that. I think he's the one who originated that. What we resist persists. Yep.
That would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it's that understanding of, wait, if I turn towards it and embrace it,
Yes.
it goes so much faster. And that's one of the things that I've learned is how quickly I can I can now process an uncomfortable emotion, whether it's one that comes up in the moment because of something that happens or something that's triggered from earlier whenever in my life. It's I'm sometimes pleasantly shocked at how quickly it's like, oh, all you wanted was for me to look at you and say it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I can do that, and it's now I can move on. And so it's not this. I'm not carrying around this like heavy backpack full of rocks all the time.
Yes. 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 Yeah. We can start unloading that backpack
Yeah,
if we're
yeah,
willing to open it up and look at it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's true, and it's interesting that it's I don't know. I feel sad, I guess, sometimes that it's so hard for so many people to look at it because
Hmm.
it's not easy work, but it's the most empowering work we can do.
Yeah. And that backpack is such a great analogy for it because it just gets heavier and heavier. The rocks keep piling up in there, and how different it feels when you start emptying that, the lightness and the freedom, and even the freedom of movement,
Yes.
right? Like, that backpack is going to limit where you can go because it's big and heavy and cumbersome, and it's just full of rocks.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. Well, and
Yeah.
it limits where we can go in the sense of, I mean, there's so many times when I just didn't want to go be around people because I was,
Yeah.
too much turmoil inside
Yeah.
to be able to deal with people. And I didn't want to admit that, like, I'm struggling,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then get their sympathy or whatever. And that was another avoidance technique.
Hmm.
And now I find again just feeling much more social because it's like, oh yeah, I can be me,
Hmm.
and I can interact with people in such a better way,
Hmm.
and it's subtle. Like it's like I say, I was able to function before. It wasn't like I was just curled up in bed not doing anything, but it's just like I notice the difference for myself, and like I say, I know other people see it because they're just like interacting with me differently.
Yes. Yes. And it's not hard to think of somebody you don't want to be around, because because of that, because of the energy that they emanate, that repels, that pushes people away, and yeah, I just think about what a different world it would be if there was more of that open-heartedness that comes, I think, on the other side of emptying that backpack. Yeah. You there was a thread in the community, and I don't have the original content. I know it was something about worry,
Hmm.
and you made this comment. Um, to me, worrying is a misuse of my imagination. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. It's a misuse of my imagination. I'm trying to train my imagination to come up with all the ways that my life and my children's lives can be wonderful, beautiful, connected, and filled with meaning and purpose. I'm going to keep reading. I love this comment. It almost feels irresponsible to not be worrying all the time. Yes, um, I love that. That is something I have definitely noticed. It almost seems like a superstition,
Hmm.
that you've got to give everything enough worry. And if you're not giving it enough worry, it feels irresponsible. I loved that you captured that. It feels irresponsible. But how often has worrying been an effective response to change in any situation? You say, for me, the answer is never. Not once has worrying moved me closer to happiness. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had a strategy that you shared. Do you remember what it was? What?
No.
Okay, so you said, I have set alarms on my phone to remind myself to ask the question, how good can life be?
Yes. Yeah, I did that for a while. Yeah, and I think it's so funny how we go straight towards, and again, this is ego protecting us. So recognizing where it comes from is we tend to go straight to catastrophe.
Hmm. Hmm.
My mom, I don't remember, I don't have this experience of her when I was a child, but my mom used to say, she's like, I'm not a worrier. If something's worth worrying about, I'll go straight to panic.
Mm.
And I'm like,
Hmm.
and I think that's I think a lot of people have that. Like if, and I wonder how much of that's just because our nervous systems are so out of whack
Mm.
for a lot
Hmm.
of reasons that we don't have to get into. But I think we're on hyper alert all the time,
Hmm.
and so it makes everything feel bigger. And when I got into that habit of like, well, how good can life be?
Hmm.
How good can it be? Why is that not our default setting? And it's ego for sure, but it's something that can be trained
You can
into
create a
us.
program.
Like we can create a program.
You can create a
Exactly.
program. How good can life be?
How good can it be? And how interesting, and then there's the whole like self-fulfilling prophecy that comes from that.
Hmm.
If we look at like, what's the worst that can happen?
Hmm.
And we really start to picture that, and that's what it like our imagination is powerful.
Hmm.
And if that's what we set our mind to proving, or however you want to look at it, it's going to come out. Like if we look at the worst that can happen for our children if they go down a medicalizing route, right, is they're going to end up a medical patient for the rest of their life and all of this, and we go into panic mode, and that's how we approach our children. First of all, it's going to set off counter will.
Yes.
The less you want them to do it, the more likely they're going to be to do it,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? And then you're pushing them away and creating a um, that chasm between you and your children, and it's just it's not helpful.
Hmm. Hmm. My term for the cliche, what you focus on expands,
Mhm.
but that's what happens. You feed it,
Yeah.
you can feed it. And here's where this question I think comes in so handy. And the free will. Choose what you feed. You can
Mhm.
choose what you feed. And that's when you set your alarm on your phone to do this, I feel like you are creating the program. That's exactly what you're doing, right? Is wiring that question into your brain so that you would have that option in the moment, right? That's what this consciousness, I think, gives us is now I can access that how good can life be program, and choose to not get get caught up in this other program of catastrophizing. Yeah. And you had a little follow-up, you said. Then the follow-up to that is, what can I do right now in this moment to move a little closer to that vision?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
I
remember
should
some
bring
of the
that one
things you would
back. That
do?
was a
Yeah.
really good one.
Well, and that's, it's, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah, that when it comes to the programs, they really do take, they don't get completely wired in, I think, anymore at this age, right? We really do have to practice it in
Mhm.
order to keep it, or we can really easily like fall back or just move on to something else too. But
Yeah.
it was interesting to hear you say I should go back to that one.
I
Yeah.
should. Yeah, it is a good one. And the other programs are always, I can almost think of the mental programs as their own separate personalities,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and those personalities want to live.
Uh-huh.
They are really interested in continuing their life. And that's when I finally understood the idea of ego death.
Mm.
When I got that. And I've experienced some of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, this is trippy and
So how do
crazy.
you recognize, tell us a little bit about ego death. What does that feel like?
There was I had one I was doing this with another coach, and I was going through the process, and it was profound. I won't go into the details now, but it was a life-changing moment when I realized some things that had happened early on, and I was able to um, process through not all of it, but a good amount. And I felt for the first time peace. I felt
Mm.
at peace in a way that I'd never experienced before. And that happened in an evening, and then I went to bed, and the next morning when I woke up, things that I normally do in the morning, I wasn't interested in. I was like, this doesn't hold an interest for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And for several days, I was like, I don't want to read that book that I was reading that I
Mm-hmm.
was enjoying because the book was it was a little gory and a little this, and I was,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I don't want to disturb the sense of peace that I feel,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, and it wasn't like I was upset about it. It was like I was happy to let it go. It felt good to just be like, I don't need that. I don't need that level of stimulation of thriller type of energy to make me feel alive, right?
Mm.
Because I think we do a lot of things. I think a lot of the anger and a lot of the frustration and ways of dealing with things, it makes us feel alive.
Yes. Yes.
And there was better ways that I wanted to feel alive. And and so that was a really I was like, this is what ego death, because this was a part of me that, like, I have friends who we would like be text messaging about, oh my God, that page in the book, did you read that? And like, yeah. And so this was a part of my identity with these people and a way
Mm-hmm.
that we connected, which is not a bad thing. It
Mm-hmm.
was just not serving me anymore, and actually like reading this one book was going to make me feel agitated,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want that. I didn't need
Mm-hmm.
that. I didn't need that agitation for feeling alive. Does that make sense?
It does. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the ego death, there's still a loss. I think I know of what I think I've experienced what you're talking about. And along with that, like not wanting it anymore, there's also this kind of like weird sadness, grief, or loss. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, like I'm kind of sad that I don't want that anymore, but I don't want that anymore. It's this weird.
Yes, that is real. There was definitely that with other pieces of, like I'm somebody who I'm very much a homebody, and
Mm,
I like to have things set up a certain way, and like letting go of that was like, oh, goodbye, old friend.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like, yes, that was there. And then there's also the aspect of, if I just drop this book in the middle and don't want to read it anymore, and now I have to explain to my friends because they're going to be like, what did you think about this part? I'm like, oh, I don't care anymore. Wait, what? So it's not. it's not an easy process. It's not like, oh, I'm just letting go of all of these awful parts of my ego and all that's going to be left is like the shiny happy part. Like that's not the way it works,
Right,
you
right.
know? And because there was definitely before that, there was a part of me that was like, oh, ego death, that sounds so nice. Just get rid of the ego. It's like that. No, we need our ego, but we
Mm-hmm.
need our ego to be healthy
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And um, okay, here's another cliche that I think really, when you experience it, you get it. And it's that one that the longest journey is from our head to our heart,
Mm.
right? And so it's not that we want to be without our ego, it's that we want our ego to be in service to our hearts.
Yes. Yes.
And I got a glimpse of that. Like I'm getting glimpses of what's possible. And I feel like, after doing the work with you, I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is so great. Okay, how much deeper can I go?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just I've always been like that. Like that's just
Mm-hmm.
my drive is how good can it be?
Mm.
And I lost my way of how good can it be by worrying and getting frustrated and arguing and wait. Like, no, this isn't. I got sidetracked for a couple of years because that was clearly not working.
Mm.
Um, so it's exciting, to have these glimpses of like, okay, I've got a glimpse now. I'm going to continue on that road and see where it takes me.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that process you're describing, that's Jung would call that individuation. You
Mhm.
know, we often think of individuation, and it is certainly a form of individuation, our children leaving the nest and figuring out who they are as adults in the world. And it is the first part of adulthood, according to Jung, is that. And it is even building that strong ego, um, and your social persona, right? And then midlife hits, and we are invited to do this other work of letting that stuff go and just being really true to ourselves. And that is a different way of being in the world. And it kind of makes you a weirdo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yes.
I've always been on the outside. Like
Yeah.
that part's not new to me. So, and I think that, yeah, it is true individuation because
Hmm.
and I think it takes a certain stage in life to be
Hmm.
ready to tackle that.
I do too.
I
Hmm.
couldn't have done this 10 years ago
Right. Yeah.
for many reasons.
Yeah.
Not the least of which not having the time when, having young children, it doesn't leave you that time because
Hmm.
this is one of those things where I have a time freedom now to be able to set aside 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is,
Hmm.
to sit with myself.
Hmm. Hmm.
And just
Hmm.
just me, just be me, just feeling what's coming up and be with it.
Yeah. And your kids are a little bit younger than a lot of
Yeah,
the
they're
moms
9
I
and
work with
12.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
9 and 12. And I think this can be it's the orientation again, right? This circumstance of having kids in the ideology can either be a distraction from this work we're talking about, it's a way to avoid the call that is going to come in midlife, for us to start doing that inner child work or the shadow work or whatever you want to call it, but befriending those parts of ourselves and tending to those so we can get rid of that backpack, right? Yeah. Or it can almost be the context for it. Like that's again kind of that obstacle is the way, like this is the invitation. Like use all the discomfort and ick that this is bringing up for you as inspiration, and as context, to do this, to discover how good can life be.
Yeah, I mean, it was just for me, it was just this constant reminding myself that they're not going to change,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I can.
Yep. So how good can life be?
How good can life be? It can be really good. And there still is that part of me that's like, don't get too attached to it. Which I think is true. Like, don't get too attached, but it's so good that it's like there's definitely a little, like we were talking about before, when we feel all that joy, is this going to
Hmm.
last? Is it going to change? Is it this? And so, and I see that and I welcome that in.
Hmm.
Okay, I see you. I see you're concerned because it's never lasted before.
Hmm.
Nothing does. This too
Right.
shall
It's not
change.
going to last.
It's not going to. That's
Yeah.
the nature of it. Great.
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's make the most of it while we can right now,
Yes.
because that's all we got,
Yes. And
and
know that there'll be pain again in the future.
yeah,
It's coming.
and I'll welcome that in too,
Hmm.
with more or less grace, depending on where I'm at and what's happening and why the pain, but
Hmm.
but I have that determination to meet whatever's coming with openness.
Yeah. 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 And in this too, I think is the confidence to know that,
Hmm.
you know, that whatever life brings your way, y- you can handle it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is not a challenge to the universe. Just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Not looking for a test, thank you.
I'm good. I'm good.
I'm good. This is good. Things are good. Can we have this for a while? Yeah, it's that's just the nature of it.
Hmm.
And it's another one of those things my mom always said, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
And that has been a mantra for myself for a long time. And I think it just gets deeper and deeper in
Yeah.
its meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last cliches?
Yeah, right? I'm full of them. I got all the cliches in the world,
Me
I tell
too.
you.
Me
Yeah,
too. But like you said, they're there for a reason.
yeah.
Yes, there's much wisdom in them.
There, if you're willing to look at it that way, yeah, there is. Yeah, no, it's always so fabulous chatting with you, and glad we got to connect, and
Yeah, me too. Me too. I
onward and
really
upward.
onward and upward and grateful for you and your ability to articulate these processes and how it's been for you. I think it's helpful for moms to hear all the stories. So yeah. Thank you, Regina. I
Thank
appreciate you.
you. Yep. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. If you're interested in connecting with other moms who are supporting each other to grow through the most difficult things life will throw at us, we invite you to consider joining us in the S&P Online Community Center. This is a private, vetted community created specifically for moms who share this circumstance. For more information and to express interest in joining, please visit the S&P Community Center tab at stoicmom.substack.com to learn more, or simply fill out the application included in the show notes of this episode. Thanks for listening, and hang in there, Mama. There's light at the end of this tunnel.